Welcome to Isn't It Obvious, where things are obvious. That's going to be the intro.
That's going to be the intro forever now.
Right.
Hello, and welcome to Isn't It Obvious, the show where things are obvious.
Obviously.
I am your host, Micah, with the great Phil and glorious Sera.
I am pretty glorious.
And the topic of today's conversation is, shouldn't all court cases be truly anonymous?
Wait.
As in, the jury is all sequestered. The defendants are unknown. They are just defendant A in case, whatever case it is. There should be no superficial attributes applied to the case beyond the facts themselves. And even the criminal evidence should be disseminated in a neutral way, just to present the facts of what happened during the case.
Is this in an effort to eliminate racism and sexism from
any type of prejudice, but also it's to curb the performative actions of the lawyers.
Okay.
So, if there's a tenuous connection for the defendant in the murder of whomever, and the prosecutor only talks about how brutal the murder was, and how violent the murder was, and how horrible it was for this person who was murdered to be murdered by a person with tentative connections to it, then they really have to argue the case itself, as opposed to the optics of a case. But this will also,
this
I feel,
would be difficult because you can't, like, a lot of the facts in a case might imply a gender or might imply a race. I don't know if that would be possible. And
if a crime is committed, why does the race matter?
It doesn't, but there are facts that might imply it. So if you have to redact those facts because it might imply race or gender or religion or some other factor that we hold to be discriminatory or something for some reason, I don't know that that would be possible. And in addition to that, I don't know that that would be constitutional because it's, now I could be wrong, maybe it's not constitutional, but I know that there is in a lot of like state constitutions, maybe I'm thinking of, or in criminal law, you have the right to face your accuser. So like if someone is accusing you of something, you have the right to face them.
But is that something that pertains to the court case itself, or is that in terms of accusation?
Say that again, but...
So, is that relevant information for the jury to have in a criminal court case, or is that meant to imply that someone committed a crime against you?
Okay, so you're not talking about keeping it from defendants and...
Yeah, this is
all
the
just...
course trial. Charges
so
are levied against a person.
So all you're saying is that the jury should be anonymous from the prosecution and defense. And the defense and the prosecution should be anonymous from the jury.
Yes.
As far as those particular facts go.
So, thinking of the Derek Chauvin case that's happening now, the whole concept of being judged by your peers is thrown out the window because it's taking place in Minneapolis, which was the epicenter of 8 months of hyper-politicized, hyper-covered, and hyper-ingested media. So trying to find a jury of peers for this police officer is going to be very tough in this area.
I just want to add this little note in the show notes. For future listeners, this is recorded in a time where, as you're listening, you probably already know the outcome of that case. But for us, podcasters, we are living through it at this moment, so we don't know what's going to happen.
We had a 5-year moratorium, then the plague happened. So,
okay,
shit caught up in that 5 years real quick.
Okay, going back to the show. I guess my question though is, it's going to be very difficult to, as Sera said, not only talk about the case, like in a situation where it's a he said, she said, but also to be able to present the evidence and facts that this event even happened. I guess the example I'm thinking about is, imagine that there are a case where a man had attacked another man at a Wendy's parking lot. Sorry, Wendy's. And a person came out and said, hey, you can't fight here. You know, this is a Wendy's. The problem here is that you then put it in a court system. how are you going to sanitize the gender? The location perhaps could be a clue as to who they are and the social economic status, the conversations they had, the witness. All of this stuff is convincing. The defense and prosecutors are convincing whether they're star witness or their plaintiff, or in this case, like the defendant, their trustworthiness by their questioning, by their demeanor, by how they react. Again, I know that's kind of silly, but this is a very human thing. And I don't know how you can even have a proper trial without having those human cues, right? Like,
Well,
But
like,
you've
what
had
about-
a lot of improper trials with those human cues being exploited.
True, but there might be some things, like, for example, evidence that you have to submit, right? That would identify a person potentially.
So you have it where the thumbprint on the murder weapon matches the thumbprint of the defendant.
Yeah, but
That
I'm thinking,
doesn't need to be conveyed with visual representation of the
okay,
defendant
well,
to the jury.
then here's another thing then. Well, what if it's a matter of rape, and you would say the semen?
The DNA matched the defendant.
Well, okay, but why would you say just the DNA? It's obviously semen.
Well, no, so
right?
you can say that.
Yes,
and
but
that's
it
fine.
still implies, even saying DNA implies that it was a male's sperm.
No, there was blood or saliva there
The-
that had those same
Hair
markers.
or
The
skin
DNA
involved
them as
on the
male.
victim's clothing matched the defendant.
Okay,
right?
Why does the jury need to see the defendant?
Well,
and
you
the
need the
defendant uses
context.
The jury in that
You
situation?
need the context because
And you can
if it's
imply
just
that
blood,
context.
if it's just blood, that means maybe the victim attacked.
I'm not saying
the...
you take out. I'm saying you make it as clinical as possible, and being as clinical as possible means you can be that specific.
right, but then the jig is up, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
now
then
you know it's a
then
man
the
versus
gender
a-
is already implied in that case because it has to
That's
be in order
be
to give
assumed,
context
but you
to
don't
the
know. You
case. Context is
trying to
important.
mitigate. It's the attempt of this is trying to mitigate any type of biases.
Well,
So
you're still going to have
the
a
real
bias
question is
because
what
it's
in
just there.
terms of a rape case.
Yeah, because depending on who the jury is, say they're a victim of rape themselves, they're going to be more likely to side with the victim. Say they are
And
a
would
person
that
who
not
was
be brought
accused.
up in
Say they're a person
finding the
who's-
jury
Well,
in exploration?
if exploration is allowed in your
It is.
Well-
You still have everything you have. It's just things are anonymous, so you can't ask the gender, race of a potential juror.
yeah, but you
But
can
you
ask.
only have
But you
to
can ask.
explain your
Well,
facts.
have you been a victim of sexual assault? And you can answer yes or no.
And that applies to both genders.
It does.
It does.
But a person who's playing odds might be like, okay, well, this is, if they say yes to this, I don't want, as a defense, I don't want this person on my...
I don't see how that tactic hasn't changed.
Uh,
Like, it won't
no,
change
it
in this
hasn't.
because you will
but-
still have that.
That's what I'm saying is like, it doesn't, you can still guess pretty accurately and you can still imply things and you might still have to necessarily imply things based on the evidence.
But it's not putting it blatantly out there, and it's not the lawyers playing on those prejudices of the jurors they wanted there for the sake of exploiting that prejudice.
There is a kind of funny in my brain how you're describing it. It's like I'm going to the holodeck. Sorry, guys. I think of it like the holodeck, where
Chapter 1.
there is a real court case that does happen. There's no jury there, right? It's just the criminal defense and everything is happening. And then the jury is now summoned and they're going to this like holodeck and they replay the whole case, right? But someone out there has changed everyone to like that they kind of graph paper look. So you don't know what the gender is of anybody. You don't even know the size. All replaced by 3D models, right? Like a terrible CGI film. And someone out there is tirelessly editing things like imagine you can sanitize this as possible, right? So it's all sanitized. You don't know if it's people are replaced
the Dateline infographics.
right. It's instead
And that
of
kind of thing where it's just a, emergency response dummy
Mhm.
kind of sitting in the middle of the floor.
right.
And then it pans out to the house to show the crime scene, but it's not actual crime scene photos. That can elicit more of an emotional response from the jury.
And now imagine that there's a judge that's trained in this, and the prosecutor and defense can now like say, well, I don't like the shape of this dummy. I don't like the shape of this. But they spend the time. Let's just say we have infinite resources to make this happen. Like I'm trying to make this idea in my head. Like, okay, let's see if we can actually make this work. From a thought experiment side. Now it's all done. The questions about DNA, like both the defense and prosecutor are arguing whether it should be just DNA or it should be blood or saliva or whatever, right? And if it comes to a point where it's like, hey, look, we can't have this narrative happen without revealing the gender, the judge, the defense, and the prosecutor agree, right? Like there has to be some consensus. Okay, imagine this is sanitized as much as you can, right? And then you press play. And now the jury is there. They're watching papercraft happen in real life, or like the dummies, and then the people talk. All the voices are, for the most part, neutral. And you play this whole thing out. You don't know if it's a he or she that did this activity or crime. And then you say, okay, juror, what do you believe? Right? Juries can't actually go out there and ask questions anyway. Like they're kind of fucking stuck in a box.
Yeah, they're watching a show.
And you can't even take the jury can't even ask for a transcript, which is kind of funny, right? So I guess
really,
yeah, it's strange. So it's like
no,
you can't
really,
you can't touch the stenographer's work.
The thing that's the legal script of the court case.
I think the jury can maybe take notes.
Yeah, you can take notes.
But that's pretty much it, right? And so
it seems inefficient.
That's just that. Okay, so I agree with you, Micah. That's like that seems kind of odd anyway. But okay, fine. So our baseline is already odd.
I didn't know that. So
at least in Minnesota, I don't know if it's the same for everywhere else.
We'll have to look that up maybe later.
Look at the show notes, fellas,
and just tell us why we're wrong, listeners.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Imagine that someone took the time and effort, and the team had sanitized as much as they possibly can, and then there was consensus between the groups of all the parties. You press play. Now, I do admit that it would remove a lot of bias, right? Because like I often say, okay, did I eat the onion here, right? Like, am I falling for this this news? Did they hook me into this? And I try to say like, well, if I rearrange the actors, let's see how this would work out, right? So I swap in race, swap in gender, swap in, whatever it would be, and flip the script and say, okay, play in my own brain. Which one would I side, right? Like a good one would be those silly Trump things that are like, did you know that in the height of the Soviet Union, that they imprisoned more of their population than anyone else in the world? And
yes, and as a military dictatorship, that is their only recourse to control their population, because it wasn't actually different tangent.
But then they would even go further, and then they say not only did they are the most incarcerated people, but like they're the most incarcerated in the whole world, and they also have their military budget is more than the top 10 allies combined, and it's like, fooled you, it's not North Korea, it's America. It's not Soviet Union, it's America, right? Like they try to make you like, oh well, yeah, I disagreed up to this point up until now. And they would say that about Obama or President Trump, right? Like they would say, well, actually Obama was the one that authorized the most of the people to be deported, not Trump, right? Like something like this. Or Obama had more drone strike kills, and they're like, oh, interesting, right? If you flip the script, it suddenly becomes more like you're a fanboy rather than you're really objective. So,
except both of those are factually inaccurate. Trump did deport more people than Obama, and he did kill more people in airstrikes.
Show notes, fellas.
Very funny.
Show notes. We'll have to.
Granted, Obama killed a lot of people in airstrikes, and that is not a good thing in his presidency. But Trump still killed more in 4 years than Obama did in 8.
Right. I mean, the facts are irrelevant in this story, like as they are in real life. The issue
doesn't
here
matter. I'm a troll. Don't egg me.
Is that you change the actors' names and suddenly the story doesn't appear the same way. And I think sanitizing it is a really good way of doing that, because why?
It's the idea is justice needs to be blind,
right?
Because justice applies to everyone. So you need to lower it down, and I think the acting nature, like there's the joke that politics is for ugly actors, but I think lawyers fall into that same sense too.
I think for crimes that are not sexually motivated, I think you could maybe sanitize it more.
All right, so for the sake of clarification, because I always think when sanitize is stated in a type of discussion like this, it's a negative. are we approaching sanitizing as a negative aspect for this conversation?
I thought it was
I'm going to say
positive.
neutral. I'm going to say neutral for me. I'm not.
Okay,
I'm not taking it as a negative, or I'm taking it as a true neutral here.
I think sanitized in this context has a charge to it.
Okay, well, let's change.
And just my perspective, I just want to clarify that we're using the same words the same way.
Fair enough. I was thinking it was a positive way of saying that you're...
I like how we all three have very different interpretations
Right.
of
You're
how the tone's coming off.
You're essentially...
No, it's word usage, like, because
Well,
you think
as
sanitize
we
can be
know,
easily akin to whitewashing, and then that is the
well, in
antithesis
the era
of what I wanted
of
to discuss.
Corona, sanitized just means safe. So that's a
But
positive.
do we actually say Like, do you say I want to
Hand
sanitize my
sanitizer.
hands right now,
Yes.
or am I going to clean my hands right now?
No, I'm gonna go use the hand sanitizer on my hands.
But are you saying you're sanitizing your hands,
Yeah, I might. But anyway,
Sarah?
I might. I don't really use
Like,
the word very
words
often.
are important.
They can
In-
be, but
in my
they
line of-
also are
They
interpreted.
are.
They are,
It's not
but
a can be. It's they are.
They can be, but they don't. They aren't always. Sorry to say. Anyway, that's a different isn't it obvious?
in my line of work, it's considered to be a good thing, right?
Okay.
But,
all right.
but I
That's
look
all I
at
wanted.
I look at it as positive. But yeah, it
But-
could be negative.
but
That's
let's-
a whole...
Maybe sanitized for you isn't the right word. Maybe just
Well, because sanitizing is cleaning
Neutralizing-
it for, like, general consumption.
neutralizing
and that is bad
the
in the
charged-
context of the argument I'm making.
neutralizing the charged biases. Then,
Yeah. Okay.
like,
So you're neutralizing. Oh, that
taking
sounds
out-
worse, but okay. Like the
Eh,
target's been
okay.
neutralized.
Yeah, neutralized sounds
but, yeah.
destroy.
Yeah.
but yeah, you know
Yes.
what I'm saying, right?
You did the magic. Someone
Whatever.
magic wanted this.
Someone
And-
magic wanted this. Yep.
Thank you, editor.
But I don't know that you can I don't know that you can do that with a sexual assault crime.
Well,
but I think you could
but
easily do it with a violent crime that doesn't involve that.
Well, the house
Aspect.
system would be like it may not work on a crime of sexual nature, right? Because people are gonna just they're not dumb. They're gonna know that even if it was a paper version of them, right? Like they're gonna fill in the blanks pretty quickly. So I think that the defense and prosecutor and the judge in this case, in this fantasy world of unlimited resources and someone can CGI this up real quick, would say, look, this isn't working. Obviously, the jury needs to know certain information for this case to proceed. And then, the judge would say, I will allow it. We're going to make it so that it's clear that what we want to do is try to remove as much biases as possible. And so
maybe like race would not be
right.
Admitted, but
Yeah.
the gender,
like race,
the
historical locations. Because, like, he grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, so he's just violent like they
well,
all
then
are,
that's
kind of thing.
that's
And those
biasing-
generalizations.
Yeah, but that would be hard too, because saying that would imply socioeconomic status, which might also imply race, or just that he's poor.
So that is part
Which
of an
creates
aspect
a
that needs to be
bias. But what if that
eroded from
what
being
if
an important
that
aspect
but
for
what
cases.
if that context could be proven to be important? Like maybe it is relevant to the case. Like maybe his poverty was
The defendant had to murder those people because he
No,
was so
but
impoverished
his
that was his
motivation.
only way of
to
making
prove
money.
no to prove his motivation. Maybe it was like say it's he murdered his wife, or she murdered her husband for the insurance money. Maybe they were poor and that was the motivation. They would need to know that information. Maybe
I think you don't need to include their age, for example, or where they're exactly from, right?
Yep.
Like, or how they look, if they have
but
tattoos.
if it's relevant in the motivation,
If it's relevant, yeah. I think one that's an example of like, well, it's a race-motivated attack. And then you're like, okay, well, you don't need to include the races, right? So you don't know if it's what minority attacked one other minority, or if it was a minority at all. Like, you could just say like race is involved here, but you don't tell them what the race is unless the context is important. And I think that you could, in that case, you don't have to reveal their gender as well, unless it's important.
Okay.
So
if in this court cases are non-hypothetical, if it's just the jury can't see the judge or the lawyer's actual faces, or the prosecutor or defendant, or whatever, those teams, the legalese, all that shit. If it's all just everyone is sitting on a Zoom meeting and they don't have an accurate representation of whomever's being talked about, is that a better way of getting around these biases?
Well, that's the problem too, is that
Still, voice implies some things.
voice
as well.
implies it. Like, I was thinking, like, what if you're visually impaired? Like, you need glasses to see, and imagine that you just took them off. Well, you'll know that that person's of a smaller stature, and then the other person, you know that the voice of the defendant or the victim is this type of voice, so you can assume that it's a woman or a man, right? Like, you would have to really green screen this, like, terrible
What if
Star
it's all
Wars
done
style.
through Siri?
And voice changing
Well, then,
or something.
yeah, but now you're like doing real-time editing. Oh, it can't be real-time, first of all. Now you're doing editing, and the way you edit films can change the way that the story is played, right? Obviously.
But if it's all through a voice augmentation, is that causing too much editing restrictions that a full case can't be carried out?
It might be, yeah.
And if that is the fact, is it because they didn't have enough facts to prosecute that case initially?
I mean, if you really talk
Maybe not.
If you really talk about a case where someone says that the standard is with a shadow of a doubt, they actually, I shouldn't speak too much of this, but that's actually not the standard. Like, it's clear that that's
it's whatever is agreed to between
Right.
the two parties.
And I talked with a friend, an older coworker, about this, where he said, well, I really believe the defendant because it was clear that he was a good guy. And I was like, okay, please tell me more, like, explain. And they're like, well, the person who was accusing him of all these bad things, he has a very violent history. He was discharged dishonorably. You can kind of tell he was just a bad person. And the defendant happened to be a relative, and he was going to college, and he was clean shaven, and he spoke softly, and you could see that this person was a good person, and the other person is really sketchy, and what this defendant did wasn't true, right? And I was like, one of our, like, there's a German coworker with us, and he's like, he puts his hand on the guy's shoulder. It's like, I'm glad that you're saying this, because if I was ever in an American justice system, I'm really afraid of people like you in the jury pool. Like, if I was there, like, I'm really afraid that people like you are in the jury pool, and that I need to know that. Like, I need you to know that. And we all laugh, because it's clearly like, come on, you can't strip emotions away. You can't strip your eyeballs away, right? Like, again, people thin slice people really quickly, which is within a fraction of a second, whether or not.
We know that, but we also know that that's not always, your first impression of a person isn't always true. And a lot of defendants will dress up in suits. They will shave to, give their best appearance at their court case, because appearances do make a difference.
But then you also have those defendants that show up in the county courthouse smocks that they are just in.
True.
That can affect how they are perceived. And that itself can be a detriment to their case.
Yep.
I mean, if they had a huge neck and face tattoo, right? Like, this is...
Oh, don't even get me started on how women are, like, who are accused of murdering their significant others, like, God forbid they show any emotion or no emotion. Like, God forbid, because the jury will either take that as, oh, they clearly don't care, they're cold-hearted, and they're a cold-hearted killer, or, she's clearly faking it.
Remorse.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot of media that reports on the mugshot of suspect A and be like, look how they look in this mugshot, that's clearly a killer. And that's a lot of manipulation that goes into a case, regardless of the facts.
There's another one too,
and that can absolutely contaminate a juror pool.
There is a problem as well with women not being taken seriously for. I know this is not about juries, but like about their medical concerns unless they lose weight.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
there are people that are like maybe 20 or 50 pounds overweight, and their doctor's like, well, you don't really experiencing these pains. You're probably just need to lose.
Yeah,
Like
so
they're like, it's
they
something
lose
else.
50, 40 pounds, and they go in and they're like, oh, turns out you had freaking colon cancer the whole time.
Right, or you
And
have
you're just like, yeah, I wasn't making it up.
yeah, and these are medical professionals, right?
Yeah.
Like this is their specialty.
Yeah.
And they have that bias. So like, the problem is that I really don't know if I agree with the premise. Like, if the doctor didn't hear that it was a woman, that obviously they need to know because it might not just be colon cancer, it could be something else, right? But it's like, okay, here are the stats. They would even look at the stats and be like, oh, well, it's probably something to do with weight. Like, they wouldn't take a second look until it fit the exact standard of what they were thinking. And so then maybe you tell that doctor, like, oh, well, this person's BMI is normal. What would you do now? Oh, I would run this test. Okay, then run the test. Oh, well, I can't because it's expensive and insurance won't cover it and whatever, right? We have a huge host of other problems with our medical.
Different topic we'll discuss at some point.
But in this case, it's like, yeah, if you did neutralize some of these variables that the doctors are making wrong for women in this world, then that would actually be a really nice thing. You're actually treating them like at face value. I wish that there was a way we could do that with the law enforcement and the justice system we have. But god damn it, is it hard. Like, if I see somebody who is a defendant and they have, again, like tattoos all over their body and their face, I'm going to be like, how do you get a job like that? Like, how do you, I mean, like a white collar job where you work in an office 9 to 5, right? Like, it's so divorced from my reality, right? Like, I immediately cannot treat this as a unbiased situation because this person is making life choices that I am baffled about. Not just like disagree, but just like question marks all the way through. Like, how did you get this far this way? And then you could say something, well, I thought you were a libertarian, Phil. People have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies unless they hurt somebody, right? And I'm like, fair enough, but like this is behavior that would be economically damaging to continue this way, and yet you still
Phil,
do it.
If you're a juror in this case, does that matter to what part of their life you have to pay attention to?
It doesn't, no. But the problem is that when I see something like that, it makes me super vulnerable to be manipulated, right?
So if you make it where court cases are anonymous, and you have a weird gray shell, and you can only present evidence in a gray shell view, will that not lead to better prosecutorial situations? Because the case has to be harder, because they have to only defend on facts, not exploiting your emotions. Because the defendant may have a neck tattoo that you find disgruntled, that's the reason why you're on that jury, and that is why the prosecution is going to exploit that facet of your biases to find a guilty conviction?
I think it's possible to do that with some cases. I think it would be beneficial to do it with probably a lot of cases. I don't think it would work with every case.
But if you do it one, you have to do it for all, because we have equal expression of the law.
No, because judges have jurisdiction of their courtrooms, and they can make decisions to include or exclude evidence. So, in truth, it probably would end up coming down to, like, if you had the standard set to eliminate all of those factors, say there's a standard list of factors that you would scrub from any case normally. It would be up to the judge and the prosecution and the defense to say, I need to add this for context. And the judge would be the arbiter of whether or not the jury would hear would hear the context of maybe their race or their gender, if it is in fact significant. That would have to be how it would go down, I think.
And again, the technology to be able to do this, it might be closer than I realized, right? To be able, like, there was a lawyer that was a cat, but he said he wasn't a cat.
I'm not a cat, but you don't know.
But maybe,
That's like something a cat would say.
I don't know how to get this filter off. Wink, wink.
But, I mean, so it's possible to do this, I suppose, but it also works against the defendant too, right? Like, because you don't get to see the person's eyes or the emotion. And for people like my old coworker, this mattered, right? Like, it reminds me of this case where there was a guy who could tell if people are lying. And
that sounds like bullshit.
He thought he could tell if people were lying.
Right,
Might be a good reader, but not 100%.
So, like, there was this, I forgot what book it was. I think it's The Force of Habits or something like that. Show notes, people. But the point was that there was an old game show in the 70s where there were these actors who would play this one man. Like, there's a Air Force captain, and he was also a community college teacher, but he was also a judo person as well, right? Like, studied like black belt in judo. And he was also an avid fisherman. And they all dressed up like, the actors kind of looked the same, right? They fit the bill. And they all dressed up as this thing. And then the contestant is trying to figure out who was the real person, right? Like, classic 1970s game show.
It was made before that, and it's still on the air now.
Okay. So, the person who says, "Oh, I can tell if they're lying," he was always able to get the person right, and he was baffled why this show existed. He's like, it's clearly the guy there, like that's the guy, right? Like, why bother with this show? Everyone knows this. And then they're like, no, not everyone knows it because the actors are very convincing. It's like, no, the actors are terrible, and he was able to call it out every one of them. And I am convinced that there are people out there that are good at detecting if someone's bullshitting or not, right? And it's kind of like, I hate to be crass, but if you meet somebody in a few seconds, right, you would know whether or not you want to be friends with them, at least to start off with, right? Like, if this person is good or this person's bad. You already put them in a bucket. Now, first impressions are misleading, but you've already started off on this decision. So I remain convinced that there are people that are very good at judging character, or at least know if someone is bullshitting.
Generally, yeah.
And if you are going to put a mask on them, you're doing them a great disservice, right? You're gray shelling them so you can't see their tattoos or their race or whatever it is. And now you only have this type of weird, Siri voice coming out. It's like,
yeah, well, there's a lot of people who are really bad.
Doesn't that also work against incredibly charismatic prosecuting attorneys?
And like, let's be honest, there's a lot of people who are really bad at determining
like
false.
The height of the bell curve is, I don't know if people are telling the truth or not. You have some on the I know when people are lying, and some on the I believe everyone for whatever they say.
That's me.
I'm trying to get everyone to that bell curve where they don't know, and they actually have to critically think. By removing those inherent ability for manipulation, because we are just meat sacks. And we fall for those things. That's why Donald Trump was president. Everyone knew he was shit at everything. Literally everything. But he had a charisma that carried him to the presidency.
Yep, I agree with that. If he had...
if he was a blank face, everyone would be like, that's a fucking racist.
Right.
And that would be the end of it, regardless of what he said. He's like, make America great again. It's not great on a monotone.
There was this concept that politicians should run as like the masked singer, so you don't know who they are.
I would so be for that. At this point, I want random lottery. Fuck elected officials.
I don't like that idea either, but we've already discussed that.
No, it's not great, but we already live in a broken system, so why not try some shit?
Devil, I don't know.
I agree with you, Micah, that if you can...
You learn more from the devil you don't.
If you cater to the bell curve, like, you're not going to try to... Like, I think the people who can tell a bullshitter is greater than the people who can't.
Americans.
How many people do you know who have fallen for?
I'm from a family of hoarders. They all buy into salesmen.
Just look at all the religious people. I'm just kidding. That's maybe unfair, but
Especially Catholics.
kind of true. But I'm thinking more like the people.
Closing that door for now, guys.
No. The evangelicals are worse because all of that is just a fucking grift.
I'm thinking more like scams. Like let's be honest. This is a lot of like anti-vaxxers maybe or
Baptists.
Let's go with
Born-again Christians.
let's go with what we can all agree is wrong and horrible anti-vaxxers. Like those people have the worst judgment. The absolute worst judgment I've ever seen.
But their belief in anti-vaxxing is not the worst of their judgments.
Debatable.
Here's my...
They're putting a disease in you. That seems counterintuitive to curing a disease.
Well,
they have some
but
merit
the harm
there.
Committed by that one belief can be catastrophic. And
if they don't take the disease seriously, yes. If they're anti-vaxxers but maintain whatever safety protocols, then it's like, all right.
Yeah, if they get their vaccines despite not wanting to get them, that's, or
goes against the anti-vaxxer.
Vaccinating their kids. I mean, but that's not an anti-vaxxer. That's...
There's a fair amount of Tuskegee Airmen that might argue that vaccinations aren't the best things.
They probably aren't. There's definitely side effects. I'm just saying they sometimes... Anyway, sorry.
It wasn't about side... Okay.
No, it wasn't about side effects.
The Tuskegee experiments, yes.
Just about institutional racism and human experimentation.
Syphilis. All right, so my comment here is that...
You're fine, the itching's okay.
The two takeaways I have, Micah, is I gotta finish the IO board game, like the card game where people like whip out the logical fallacies. And the one that I want to pull out that I can't because I don't have access to the internet right now
Appeal to emotion?
Is the one where your sample size is too small, right? So you only remember the one because it's memorable, right? And all the other times you remember it's not because it's not novel enough. Our memories work this way. So the sample size is too low, but there's actually a classic name for it. So what I think I'm falling victim here is because it's the problem where I think that most people are good at intuition and that most people can tell if someone's bullshitting. And the reason why I think this is because I remember more people that are good at it than I know that are bad at it, right? So my sample size is, personally, I know more people that are good at it.
You have better friends than I do.
Maybe, and this is a sample size issue, right?
Or a skeptical family.
So even my family, and again, I come from a family of those that support the GOP policies that boggles my mind, but whatever. Like, their logic is still sound enough that I can, like, somewhat respect it because they don't like big government and they don't want to have their tax dollars go to places they don't think are useful.
But
they're okay
totally fair.
Right, which is, like, strange that they think it's okay that they're of the corruption that the GOP has to offer, but then they say something like, well, the Democrats don't...
Because they believed in the GOP when Reagan was in charge, and Reagan was the best Republican.
They lived through Carter, and then they lived through Reagan, and they enjoyed Reagan's policies more than Carter, even though that's a very strange way to put it, right? Like, I'm like, well, that doesn't really explain the past of, okay, whatever, fine. So that's their view.
That's our current quagmire.
Right. I think that there's this, but even then I could see that they can tell if someone's bullshitting them or not. Like, they can't tell if politicians are because they're kind of through a television screen, right? And
they're also very good at bullshitting.
They're professional bullshitters.
They're professional bullshitters.
And also, they're good at whataboutism, which is, fine, whatever.
Deflection, yeah.
But,
I've been taking some notes, so hopefully it's been showing in my arguments.
But, like, individually, if some mechanic is like, oh, yeah, you're going to need elbow grease for this, it's like, no, you're bullshitting me, right? Like, day-to-day interactions are going to be like, no, you're bullshitting. Because I need to know we live in this society where everyone's trying to bullshit each other. So I think that again, this is a sample size error. But for most people I know, they know if they're getting bullshitted or not. And so they kind of need to see it in front of them happening. Now, for those like big rallies of a politician and they all like say hurrah for this guy or girl, I'm going to be like, that's strange. Like, you shouldn't be like a fanboy or a fangirl for a politician. That's just, why? That's odd, but fine.
Are you saying me being a homosexual is bad?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good, because it's very bad.
Mhm.
So my thought here is that like, and they're being hypnotized by a professional bullshitter, but like day-to-day stuff, like this victim or this defendant, right? I think they're pretty good at it. And again, I recognize that I have a logical fallacy, but because I don't think people are that bad at bullshitting. I also don't think that people are that bad at detecting it. So professionals, that's harder to do. That's what they do for a living. That's how they make their money.
Mhm.
If you give them a gray like shell and you say, okay, this person, you really are doing them a disservice, because I think that yeah, you're gonna have some attractive psychopath on there, fine. But again, if we're talking about bell curves, like you should give the defendant a chance, right? If they're really um again
Give them a chance to appeal to your mercy.
no, give them a chance to be able to express that they're trying to tell their truth, right? And
But why do you need a visual confirmation? Like, you don't need to look at that defendant if they can present their case well.
because they can't
I admit I didn't think of this from the defendant aspect in terms of their appealing to emotion. I was thinking more of a prosecutorial aspect and how they manipulate it for their gain, because they have the power of the state often behind them. Or they have more money behind them because you're able to lobby for a lawyer to represent your case.
there are
And
like
that is not correct in a lot of defendant cases.
there are a lot of problems I see with a lot of incentives that are perverse with prosecutorial staff. First of all, right? Like people get elected as a district attorney based off of how many cases they can solve, and they point to a case that they thought was tremendous, even though it turns out to be absolutely abhorrent.
Well, I can get you to be VP.
And the other one too is that like, so yeah, conviction rates got to be high, and the defendants typically are those that are using again public services, so they're already using a public defender that's fucking overworked like crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're gonna have a really shoddy attempt. So like again, the cards are usually stacked against the defendant, unless the defendant is rich and is a fucking horrible human being. And
But if you take out those biases, does that not help the defendant? Because you're not able to point out the prosecutors aren't able to point out the visible societal
Characteristics.
Yes,
They're charged.
those type of the stereotypes, the
Race,
things that will play on
gender.
the emotions.
I would argue maybe like I would need to have like a mock trial of this to see if it would work. Maybe you're right, but they say that attractive people get lesser sentences for the same type of cases than those that are not. I don't know if that's really true. Look at the show.
Well, that's another factor I didn't even think about. Weight or attractiveness.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
because you had that one guy who that mugshot came out, and he just had a really piercing model look, and he had, I believe, he had his sentence diminished because of the publicity, and he got out earlier because of that.
yeah, there's a level of charisma here as well, and so and again, this is me siding with the defendant because I feel like prosecutors would only prosecute against somebody who is easy targets. And they won't go for people who are rich because they can draw out the game longer than the DA is going to be there. So, like in the cases of crimes of the sexual nature, it gets really sad, right? Most people don't even bring it up to begin with because they don't have any hope that the case is even going to get pushed through.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Cough, Epstein, cough.
Right, and so
no one takes victims seriously.
So then go ahead and try to put a grayscale on that, so to speak, right? And say like, oh, well, let's try to neutralize this as much as possible. I'm going to be like, none of this is, I agree with the premise, right? But on one hand, if I'm too in favor of defendants, then there are cases where defendants are going to get away with heinous crimes. If I'm too in agreement with prosecutors, then there are going to be cases where innocent people may be executed.
But both happen now.
Both
How
happen
do we
now.
Square that circle.
Well, we first get rid of the death penalty, and yep. Start with that.
I would be fine with that, but I also disagree because there are certain people that should not be supported by our society. Because we've made rules that they broke that mean they shouldn't be part of our society.
Which is why we put them in a hole, in a cell.
But we pay for them to live.
Yeah, well, we pay for them to be out of our hair. That's the price of doing business.
So why not chuck them into a 50 square mile forest reserve where they have to fend for themselves?
Because I want to go
death is
hiking,
inevitable.
Micah. I want to go hiking.
I
I want to
There's
enjoy.
a
I
giant
want
chunk
to
of
enjoy
North
the
Dakota that
wild.
nobody gives two shits about.
I
That is 50 square miles.
I honestly think the way to solve this, and I keep mentioning it before, and people are like, "Oh, that's just from Black Mirror." And I'm like, "I never seen an episode of Black
Everybody
Mirror."
dies at 50?
Is that not everyone? Is that like technology is going to solve this anyway, right? So like if
How so?
if the defendant didn't have a phone, right, and so their alibi is like, "Well, where were you this night?" They're like, "Oh, well, I was at home." It's like, okay, pull up your cell phone because that thing is pinging powers all the time, and that's only getting more accurate.
Sure, so you're going with the Adnan defense.
Well, no,
But also, a person could leave their phone at home and then go commit a crime.
I honestly think...
And if you're only dating it on the meta information, then their phone was at home. Thus, they could not have committed the crime.
I think it's going to get even worse than this, right? Like, I think that I'm surprised even at this age, how much people are willing to give their personal information on social media, Reddit and Facebook and whatever, right? Like, they don't give a fuck. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy, but it's almost like I'm going to voluntarily push this out. It's almost like if you don't have social media, you're suspicious at this point.
A little bit, in some ways.
In some ways, like especially in the dating pool, I imagine, right? Then there is this thing of like, okay, you're a creep, or you're really on the odd side of society if you don't even have like a Facebook page. What's up with you, man? Like, what are you hiding? And this is where I'm going to theorize where we're going to go next is like people want to have Alexa start recording things like a stenographer of what people were talking about. And people seem to be fine with that to order toilet paper, right? There was a police case where they wanted to like summon that as an alibi, right? There's another one where I think people like starting to use dash cams more often because of insurance scams in Russia. And there's always interesting footage of dash cams in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people are going to go one step further, and with technology being so cheap as it is, they're going to just have either audio recorded all the time because it's your legal right to have at least one party consent, right? Just because it doesn't cost any data and it's just a feature, and who cares? I can ask my personal digital butler on my rectangle to do that for me, like in Star Trek. And then it's going to go another step further, and people are going to have a video like that, like a badge cam, but for just regular civilians because they don't give a fuck about their privacy anymore. We entered some weird post-privacy world. And in that time, when something happens of a he said, she said, now you have evidence. You have your geolocation, you have audio, you have video, and you have Facebook or your social media that's constantly logging what you're eating for food.
Multiple videos, and not just one, because let's also be honest, deepfakes are still becoming a thing. Like,
right.
you can fake shit easier and easier these days.
The jury is going to ask probably the first of all, it's like how fingerprint was so revolutionary. Now it's like one of the things that people expect, and DNA as well. And they're going to want their digital fingerprints and digital DNA. Like, okay, well, where's your audio feedback? Why didn't you have it? What do you mean you left your phone there? That's super suspicious, right? They already asked that. They already say that now. I honestly think it's going to be at a Black Mirror level where people are going to have their own dash cam, but for their personal use. Because it's just something they don't care about. It's just more convenient for them to order Domino's pizza by looking at a billboard.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, my life isn't interesting, so anyone who's watching it is weird. What are they going to get out of this? Nothing?
Like, people are already doing this with a confrontation with the police. They have their phone out.
Yep.
But I imagine there's going to be something as simple as an American flag lapel that you could put on that's going to be, like, enough resolution and enough battery life.
Ironic?
And enough energy to be able just to be like, yep, it's so lightweight and it records at 3 megapixels, but that's all you need, and it's just like an Apple Watch. An Apple Watch is another thing too. I think this is going to happen in 20 years.
Less.
And
it's great that I'm such a curmudgeon that everything you said, I'm like, no, fuck that. It can't happen. That is horrible. That is bad. Fuck, that's going to be the future.
Yeah.
It's going to be the future where now, like, you have, like, now imagine all of that shit that people voluntarily do because you get another 10% off your order on socks from Kohl's because you walk past the store.
Fucking overpriced.
And
Kohl's.
There's like some weird economic incentive, and the byproduct of this is people are black mirrored. And now you have the court setting, and technology has already solved it now, right? And if
there isn't even a case. It's just here's the evidence.
And there are 10 witnesses that were in
your
your geolocation that your Bluetooth have already pinged your spot because
there's no case to argue.
If there were enough people at that hot dog stand, you get another hot dog, buy one get one. It's just
so
like it's just a strange
that hypothetical. I feel falls into one of two categories, and it's incredibly technophobic or dystopian.
I think it's the opposite of technophobic. I think that's techno. What's the word? Philia?
Technophile?
Well,
Technophile?
See, anytime I watch Black Mirror, I feel that like every episode of Black Mirror is a type of technophobic. It's the worst that technology will bring us. It's not the best. It's not optimistic.
Oh, because see, I took everything that Phil just said as a potential positive.
It's both.
Like
no, where is the sense of privacy in that
world? It's gone. It has vanished. But
this is all
because now it's optional. That makes it obligatory.
Yeah, it's the thing is, it's not because the government wants you to do it. That's the difference between this nightmare.
That's way more insidious.
That
makes it way the fuck more dystopian because it's for you to get an extra 2% off your fucking shit pizza that's killing you anyway.
Yeah, but it could also save, like, if it's your alibi, it could also save you a lot of hassle.
I mean,
and it could also prevent someone who's accused of something, and you'd be like, oh no, I actually, here's my dash cam footage. Here he is, right here at such and such a place.
But we're in a world of deepfakes. What's to stop that deepfake from being spread to those?
Multiple other people can be identified on that.
Yes,
and then
it's hard to copy and paste.
What?
It's hard to copy and paste.
It's basically a copy-paste problem. Where
it could be, but it's from different angles,
yeah.
Right? It would be a lot harder to do. Not impossible, but it would be a lot harder to do.
I mean, the government could do it, but not the average.
Not the average person.
And
because the government is making deepfakes, not the average person.
Yeah. I'm a tinfoil hat person where there could be flag false attacks.
I feel like the government has more on its plate than trying to frame some guy for
so many child actors
stealing something or hurting someone else when he was actually innocent. Like, if you could, like, in theory, you could ping, like, everyone who is in, like, the vicinity of this other person who's saying this is my alibi. And then you could take that footage or whatever, or recording.
But then don't those people have to consent to that?
I mean, in a perfect world, yes, but no. In this case, it would be like...
But it's not public information.
But it might be at that point.
Yeah, at that point, who cares? Like, they get...
So then that is a fucking dystopian future.
It super is.
That is Brave New World.
It already is happening, right? Like, this is what I'm saying. It's like,
No, there's a lot of voluntary steps. None of that is mandatory. No state is telling you have to take these extra means. But it's because we have so many failed states that people have to do those extra means to stop the prosecution that they might fall into. And that is dystopian in itself. Prove your point.
Very certain that this is going to be a thing, right? Like, and it's going to be accepted with open arms because... medical devices are only getting more affordable, but it's like the Apple Watch can measure your heart rate, right? But what if something can measure your glucose or your oxygen or some very basic diagnostic tools that can tell you that you have heart arrhythmia? And people are going to be like, oh, I just have to wear this super inexpensive thing and that happens. They could do that, fine. And what about all your public data? Well, you know what? You get a 10% off, your fee if you do this. Oh, okay. Like, I'm willing to exchange all of my, we've already seen it happen. I'm willing to exchange my privacy by using Google.com and their search engines and the way they track me because it's just more convenient. That's it. Yep. I don't even get any money out of it. I don't even get a discount. It's just convenient. I am very certain that because it's not going to be government-based, that it's going to take off like fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And imagine like you get an Amber Alert, like just the sheer like gut wrench you see that that happening. Now that's going to be resolved in record time. It's just, and the
Now, the
greatest
kid's
part
gonna
is
have a fucking Apple Watch. They'll be able to ping that kid immediately.
the greatest part of this is that like nobody is going to give a fuck about their privacy. Like they're
But
all going to just share it for free.
The issue I find with this and how you're posing it in the private sector is how many situations are there where a person is arrested under suspicion of a crime with a lot of evidence, but in order for the prosecution to actually go through and have the slam dunk case, they need to get into their iPhone. And Apple has a incredibly specific legal policy for them to jailbreak their own phone.
If
But
they need the phone
If you have it where
specifically
evidence
to
is
break
in a
or to make their
capitalistic
case,
situation, that is an issue.
if you need the phone to prosecute, that might be a difficult. Their phone, I mean, because that would be a Fifth Amendment, basically, right? Like that would be.
But is it? No, that is not Fifth. It would be Fourth Amendment for unlawful search and seizure.
Yeah.
But you get into the.
But I mean, like supplying incriminating evidence, you have the right to refuse.
Yeah, it's both fourth and fifth, right? But I would say that in this wonderful world of dystopia, the police wouldn't even need to do that because they would have enough metadata already. They know that where you
But
were.
the government wouldn't be allowed into this metadata if it's private companies pursuing the accumulation of that metadata.
That's what a warrant is for.
Not necessarily. If it's happening to the victim, right?
A warrant can't jailbreak an iPhone.
But the warrant can seize like an iPhone.
You can seize the iPhone. You can't get the information off of it because of iPhone's encryption.
Okay.
And you have to go through Apple to do that, and Apple has a real strict policy in what government affiliations they interact with to open up phones for privacy.
But you can still get a warrant
for
for that.
customers' privacy. Now you're having corporations having more access to information than governments have, and harder access for governments to get that information.
I'm just going to say this is I drink your milkshake problem, right? Like you think that this is going to give the case to the prosecutor that they need. Like they need to have access to this phone, and that's not true. Like in this case, imagine that the person committed a crime and they need to have that phone there, and there's a victim. Well, who cares about that person? Just talk to the victim, right? And then like you look at the victim's phone and it's all like fucking like sent to the cloud. You don't even need it, right?
Yeah,
and
you don't need you wouldn't need it. There's so many other devices and potential other avenues of evidence.
But you're still going through corporations to get to that information.
Yeah, but imagine
corporations won't offer that up, even if the person in question is dead.
With a warrant from a judge.
Yeah, and maybe like if it's a victim's family, they would be like, "We want you to find out this person. Here, find it." Right? Oh, okay. Oh, great. All right, the cloud data says that the person was right here in 5th Street. There were 15 people that passed by. Well, let's go talk to them. Maybe some of them have something more to show. Like you can already figure out the case. Now they get the guy. They put him in the jury. Like they put him in front of a jury. The jury says, "Well, if you're innocent, why don't you just show him your phone?" Well, he doesn't want to do that for privacy reasons. He's like, "Yeah, that's fucking bullshit." Because all of the metadata around this person is I drink your milkshake. Right? Like I already have the complete story. You're hiding something. Fuck you. And so
if it'll prove your innocence, why not?
It'll prove your innocence. Right? Why don't you do it? It's like, well, within a shadow of a doubt, it'll prove you're innocent. Well,
so pleading the Fifth Amendment means you're guilty of a crime?
No, but if you have enough other evidence pointing, it doesn't matter whether you plead the Fifth or not. You're still going to be seen as guilty. So unless you have something,
if you're very charismatic and you're saying that the prosecuting state is pointing you out because you're just a good person working on your farm.
I'm not going to say that
you are tied in because you were a little too vocal about some things, and you can get all very performative and pejoric about your defense.
Again.
And if you had it where people were anon, you wouldn't have that same impact.
Here's the issue here. Like, you can't say I want to have the bell curve and also have the edge cases too, right? Like, the people who are charismatic or have a lot of money are always going to game the system. But
no, I don't want a bell curve. I want a flat line of justice.
If you want a flat line of justice,
that's not.
This is probably the best you're going to get.
Yeah.
Right?
All right, let me hammer down that bell curve then.
Well, if you want a flat line of justice, you're going to have to give up privacy.
And the best way to give up privacy is by giving people a 10-cent
Yeah,
coupon to
discount.
their
Make
Caribou.
it capitalistic and
Right.
call it good.
It won't be for
It'll be
Caribou.
all
It'll
by-
be for Starbucks. Caribou doesn't have that clout.
It'll
For
all be by
Minnesota.
It's like saying
consent.
Tim Hortons in America would be able to give a discount for people. Come on, Phil.
It's the same. Discounts galore. People are willing to exchange their personal data for just
Ooh,
pennies on the dollar.
10% off. Ooh.
You save 5 cents on your 5% if you use your Target Red Card.
Buy 3, get
That's a
one.
good deal.
I'll
That is a
do
good
it.
deal, by the way. By the way, that's a good deal.
Buy 3 and your defense attorney is on us next time.
You almost wouldn't even need a defense attorney if your case was so strong, right? That's what I'm saying, is that
If
this
it was
whole...
in this realm of anonymity, yes.
Yeah,
but at this point, we pay a lot for lawyers that are really good actors and really good orators and can
Wouldn't it be
present
great if you
information
didn't
in
even
different
need
ways
that?
to exploit emotion.
I'm just saying technology is going to solve this legal problem, and technology is going to solve a lot of moral problems before fucking Congress would. And
That's
it's-
fucking true.
And then all of that technology is going to make us way worse because it'll just be fucking Skynet.
that I will not dispute. I'm not saying this technology is going to be used for good. It's clearly not already. But there are some net benefits, or not net benefits. There are some benefits here, like autopiloted cars, and
That should only happen
Well,
on interstates.
Hopefully I'll be dead by then, so I won't have to worry about it.
Oh fuck, we got 7 years until the Earth is irrevocably
Yeah, so
on
this is
its course of
probably
destruction.
this is probably a moot discussion. We won't even get to that point in technology. Or if we
So-
do, it won't last very long to become the dystopia that Micah thinks it'll eventually devolve into.
I have a fortnight a year, so I'm excited to see how much it dwindles in that time.
I like how the fact that technology has solved the humanity problem by killing all of humanity. So that's great. Good job,
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah, because, Phil, we were the problem the entire time.
We were the cancer the whole time.
The real cancer was the friends we made along the way. Okay.
All right,
No,
I
the
think
real friends was the cancer.
I think
you made
we've
along the
wrapped
way.
that
God
up.
damn it,
I don't
Micah,
know
that's
if we
right.
answered that, but anyway, thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Banca mucho.